All right, hello everyone and welcome. We are still doing our interview segments here at Renegade Con. I know it's Sunday, we're closing in on the end, but I thought I'd save some of the best for last. And one of those happens to be J. Alex Kevern, who does several games for Renegade. You may know him. So welcome aboard, Alex. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I didn't realize just, how many of these Renegade titles you actually have worked on in the past, that I just kept like, oh my goodness, there's a lot in here.
I know it's interesting looking back and thinking back. It was like 4 or 5 years ago now that we worked on World's Fair. And ever since then, it feels like it's been game after game and good experience after good experience. And I feel like Succulent is almost the best one that we've done. So I'm really excited to share that with people here at Renegade Con.
Really interesting. I'm certainly excited. But, you kind of brought up one that I found very interesting, and that is World's Fair, because, I think it's one of those themes that people really, really are wanting, is kind of this amusement park, World's Fair, kind of this atmosphere. How hard was it to try and design a game in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I have to give a lot of credit to Randy Hoyt. So he's the founder of Foxtrot Games and the developer over there. And he was the one that I worked really closely together on to like discover that theme and really make a game that we think did it justice. And they have a really good relationship with Renegade. So they've done not only World's Fair, but Fox in the Forest, which has been really successful, Lanterns, and a lot of their games have been in partnership with Renegade. So I originally pitched Randy a game that was mechanically very similar to World's Fair, but had a theme that was not very exciting. It was about trading along what's called the Amber Route in Europe, where you're trying to collect amber and just very generic sort of Euro resources. And I worked with him over the course of like 12 to 18 months to figure out how could we take this game that was mechanically very interesting and married it up with a theme that, like you said, people would be excited about. So he deserves a lot of the credit for that. We developed that game quite extensively, and it came a long way. And I think we ended up with a product that both like evokes this World's Fair theme really well through all the detail that's on those cards and that Ferris wheel mechanic that came about as we like started partnering the mechanics with the theme even more. And yeah, I'm really proud of how it came out. And like you said, I think it was a theme that really resonated with people. It's sort of a fascinating point in history, and also something that like we don't really have anymore, are these World's Fairs. And I think it's something that people look back, even though like we weren't there in a lot of our cases, certainly not for the 1893 one, but even for the ones that came later, to experience them directly. But it's sort of this nostalgic feeling looking back at those types of things, these sort of grand expositions that don't really exist anymore. So it's sort of fun to go back and experience that in like a 45-minute game every once in a while.
Absolutely. So I need to know, and viewers everywhere want to know, where did all the meanness come from? Because it's there's definitely some meanness in this game.
I know. Yeah. A lot of that came from like a lot of the games that inspired World's Fair. One of my favorite area majority games, and was honestly like one of the original ones in this space, is a game called El Grande. So I think it came out in 1995, which is crazy to think that that's 25 years ago now. But it's a very simple area majority game where, similar to World's Fair, you're using cubes to try to score areas and then sort of scoring majority based on whether you're first, second, or third place in that area. I think with any of those games, there's a certain amount of meanness when we're all competing over the same thing. You have this shared board where only one person can win each area. And I think that brings with it sort of a healthy sense of competition and hopefully some like positive feelings of accomplishment when you get what you need, which comes along with it. Hopefully some tension and like an exciting game to play and compete against your friends in.
No, it's a lot of fun, and it actually won a couple awards too, as I recall. It won a Mensa award, and it was runner up for a few of the artwork awards as well, I believe.
Yeah, it was exciting to. It would like each year. So the American Mensa Foundation has a whole Mind Games award. It's almost like a mini convention that they run where dozens and dozens of games are entered. Hundreds of people show up to play these games and sort of they'll rank their favorites. So each person that's there will actually get a vote. So it's actually very different than a lot of awards, which are just decided by a committee or an online vote. It's actually people who go to this convention, play all the games, and then vote on the games. So that was a pretty cool one to win, to know that people played it and liked it enough for it to win.
Now,
and then, it was nominated for
go ahead.
Some of the Origins Awards as well. So Beth Sobel did the art. Adam McIver worked on some of the graphic design, and Jason Kingsley as well. And they all did a fantastic job, all based on Randy's art direction, just making it look fantastic. So I'm really proud of it.
You should be. I mean, it's definitely a beautiful game to look at, and a beautiful game to look at needs to have everything firing, right? Like it needs to have good graphic design, it needs to have good artwork, and it needs to have good mechanics to make that card interesting to actually even get in the first place, right?
Yeah. It's really like once you get into this, you realize how hard it is to get all those things to come together and for things to like look like an integrated product. I think, you're doing all of these things simultaneously. You're trying to like make the game the best it can be, but then also make it like playable and make the board interesting and beautiful to look at, but also like functional for players. So you can't have it, the artwork be too busy in the way that it's difficult to differentiate things. And it needs to evoke the theme, but not confuse people in some ways by having unnecessary icons that could make people wonder if that means something or not. It's very, there's a lot of moving parts, and when you actually pull it off and like pull a product together that I think looks as good as that one, it's really satisfying because it takes a lot. It's not as easy as just like making each individual thing look nice. You really have to understand all of the interactions between everything. And if you're going to have blue and yellow and purple and white supporter cubes in the game, how those are going to look against the yellow and red and gray backgrounds of the board and all of those things that you have to consider. So it's really complex and there's a lot of interactions, and I've just been really fortunate to work with people who are smart and have good taste and like understand all of those things, and have also like valued my input. That's one of the reasons why I've worked with Renegade as much as I have, is I feel like they include me in the process, they value my input, and I think through that interaction and through that collaboration, we've been able to pull out some games I'm really proud of, and I'm always happy to work with them and have been really pleased with all the experiences.
Cool. Now, when I think Mensa, I think like super intelligent people all sitting in a room, a brain trust, as it were.
Sure.
So were you kind of like surprised that this is the group that kind of chose to honor the game, or is it like, oh, I understand that now?
I think the game had a number of things going for it. If you think of like the format of the awards, it needs to be a game that people can sort of understand quickly and play quickly. And there's also going to be satisfying and fun the first time you play it. So there's not going to be a lot of rules overhead where you need to play it 3 or 4 times to really sort of get it. So if you look at the games that have won in years past, so Lanterns was a game that Renegade had in collaboration with Foxtrot. They had one either the year prior or 2 years prior. They had similar things going for it. You could easily understand the rules. Somebody could explain to you in sort of 10 seconds how to play, and you sort of get it. I think given that people will often sit down with the box, open the rule book, learn the game, and then play it right there, it's often going to be games that are easy to understand, sort of easier to get into, have lower rules overhead, and can sort of click the first time you play it, versus something that's heavier and maybe sort of like more what you would expect somebody in Mensa would be into. But I think it's more the format of the convention that really gears itself towards whether you want to call them family weight games or gateway games or things like that. Really, I just think of them as like games that are easy to introduce to people and easy to understand and easy to get into, but still have that like crunchy strategy feel where it's a really satisfying experience. And I think that's often a difficult balance to achieve, to get to that satisfying strategic experience with a game that you can explain quickly and can be understood quickly. I think a lot of games try to do it with a lot of different rules and a lot of complex sort of game mechanics, and can often take even an hour to explain the game.
Right.
I think it's difficult to achieve that, and that's often something I'll try to do in a game that's shorter and easier to explain. And easier to understand and is more accessible for people. So,
cool.
So I think that's what often does well there, and I'm happy that World's Fair sort of I guess crossed the bar of games that they liked. Yeah,
excellent. Now let's skip ahead a little bit, because one of the next, I'd say, big releases from Renegade, I remember really kind of hitting the scene and hitting the ground running, was definitely Sentient. Because, that just seemed to really resonate with, especially a lot of the reviewers and things, with how that gameplay, and we were kind of on the beginning of dice mechanisms in games starting to, before roll and write, there was kind of dice as workers was kind of one of the bigger things. So where did that kind of brainchild come from?
It's an interesting sort of mechanic where I hadn't seen it really done before, but I was really playing around with this mechanic where you could place a card between two dice, and then that card would adjust the dice up and down and then score based on those dice. So that idea that you would have sort of roll the dice at the start and they would be fixed, but then you could play a card to adjust them and then score like based on some like arrangement of those dice. So the whole game would just be about sort of calibrating those dice and getting them where they, like in a way that would score you the most points. So there were lots of different things I played around with. It ended up in like one of the, actually it's like simplest forms where it just ends up as like a line of 5 dice and you play 4 cards between them. But what I found, and I think what a lot of people found, is like what sounds like a very simple concept can actually be very difficult and like brain crunchy in the best way to try to figure out, where you have a limited set of cards that score in a certain way and adjust the dice in a certain way, and like figuring out exactly where to put each one and when to put each one there is actually like this really satisfying puzzly experience. I've gotten some really interesting feedback on that game, where some people think it like even like stretches the boundaries of what a game is because it's sort of so simple and so streamlined, and it's just like, it's almost like this like calibration exercise with this little area majority game sort of attached to it. But that's one thing that like I take as a compliment almost, that it's almost so streamlined and so simple, and there's not a lot of like text or like rules overhead to worry about. It's just this like simple combination of mechanics that together all just sort of work and like make for this like interesting mind puzzle that you can spend 45 minutes or an hour with your friends trying to figure out, and then at the end see who did it best.
There you go. So I definitely enjoyed it. I think it was a a very interesting entry at that time, right? Like, because I mean, we were looking down like Role Player Sagrada, things like that, where dice placement was kind of big, but it was doing something different in how you manipulated it, which I definitely enjoyed.
Yeah, I think some people, the dice, first of all, the dice in that game are absolutely beautiful. It's probably my favorite component in any game that I've done. They're really cool. But yeah, you only roll them at the start of each round. So it's not this like, I think a lot of people will see a dice game and think it's going to be this like, have a pretty strong element of luck and you're going to be rolling them all the time. And certainly like a lot of games are like that. I think this one is more, it's more of a thinky puzzle that happens to use dice in sort of an interesting way that a lot of other games don't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you nailed it. So you brought up components. So what about Petra? Because Petra has, that's kind of amazing the way the components work in that one. Did you kind of start with this thinking that I want to create this alleyway? Like how did that evolve?
Yeah, that game really started with the idea of I wanted to make a tile pushing game. So this was like the evolution of my design process where I really wanted to design a game around a really strong hook and often like design it around a mechanic that hadn't really been done before. Tile pushing had been done by some games. So there's a game called Niagara that had won the Spiel des Jahres in the 90s one year. That did have a bit of a tile pushing element, but I hadn't really seen it done much. And I think there was a lot to explore there. So through playing around with that mechanism, I ended up sort of designing it around this theme of Petra, where there's this long, narrow canyon that would lead into the city. If you've ever seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, it's the similar canyon that's shown there. And it would open up to this beautiful building that they call the Treasury that's like carved into this rosy red rock. And really designing a game around that where it was just this long like string of tiles that you would push to sort of refill. And then you also had this personal tile pushing game that you were playing on your own personal player board. So when I pitched that to Renegade, it was just this very simple, almost like cardboard canyon that like I had mocked together just like with cardboard and scissors and sort of cutting and pasting it to shape. And as soon as I pitched it to them, I played it with Scott and Sarah from Renegade. And as soon as we finished, they started brainstorming, like, we actually think we could do some really cool things with this, of having like this molded plastic canyon that the traders could sort of flow down. And we like immediately started brainstorming like how we could turn this game into like a really cool product and really like elevate that tile pushing mechanic and figure out a way to like really emphasize it and like put like some really cool components together that like would make people excited about the game.
So that actually leads to an interesting question. I'm kind of curious, what is it like to pitch games, especially ones that, have these unique mechanisms that you're talking about, and trying to be able to get that point across, succinctly, unlike I'm doing right this second, succinctly, clearly, and, so that they get the hook.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an art to pitching. I think I've learned a lot over the years. So I've been pitching games for 6-7 years now. I think it's really important to look at it from the publisher's perspective. They want to understand that like the gameplay is good, but also that this is a product that they're going to be able to sell to consumers. So, I think it's important to give them a good idea of how the game plays and how the game works. But then also focus on like, what are the differentiating factors, or what are the niches that this game fills that other games don't fill? Or like, what are some cool things that we could do like with this game that will get them excited. And if they're able to get excited about it, they know that consumers will get excited about it as well.
Sure.
So with Petra, it was this, I really emphasized sort of this tile pushing element that hadn't been done by a lot of games, and we could sort of emphasize it and market it as a tile pushing game that was sort of unique in a way, and people sort of want to inherently try something like that. I wish I had come up with the idea of the molded plastic canyon that's in that game, but that was their idea. But I was able to sort of give them enough in the way that I sort of put together the prototype that I think they were able to see what they can make it. And for so for a lot of games, it's important to like understand that the publisher is looking at this as a product. They don't, not that they don't care like about all of like the nitty gritty rules and sort of exactly how to play the game. They'll certainly have to learn that eventually. But one of the mistakes I made early on was trying to explain like every little detail of the game versus like trying to focus on like what are the highlights of the game, what makes it fun, like give them idea of like what are some of the interesting choices you make in the game. And then instead of me like spending 15 minutes just trying to explain the game, spending 5 minutes doing that, and then like seeing if they're interested, and if not, like quickly moving on to the next game I want to show them. Typically, they don't need to understand every detail of the game to understand whether it's something that'll fit with their portfolio, is the type of game that they're looking for. Typically, they'll latch onto something pretty quickly. So I know with Succulent, they were looking for a game that could use tiles in the way that Succulent uses tiles. So they latched on to that sort of component or that element of the game pretty quickly. And then we were able to, obviously they wanted to try the game and make sure that it worked and it was fun. But I think you want to give them as many of those things that differentiate it or make it unique or could be a selling point of the game. And then if none of those are interesting to them, then move on to the next game you want to pitch them. And hopefully another publisher likes those other things.
How fleshed out do you like to have your designs before you walk into a pitch meeting? Like, are you the type person who, well, I have this idea, and then it just kind of pull out 3 more after that? Or do you like to have, this is the one for this moment?
Yeah, so some people will pitch at different stages. For me, I need to be comfortable enough that if they wanted to publish it as is, I would be proud of it, and I would be okay with them doing that. Because I've had that happen before where I've pitched games and very little development has been done, and they sort of published it as is. And thankfully, those situations have turned out okay. But I don't want to be in a situation where I pitch a game that I know still has issues, and either like they're stuck trying to figure out those issues, or it ends up getting published with those issues still existing. So often I'll work either by myself or with my playtesting group to try to work out all those issues and get it to a point where it plays smoothly. There's no like big, there's no big problems with the game that I can see. There's maybe some development that can still be done because any game can be improved. But if they were to take this out of the prototype box, put some art on it and make it, I would be comfortable with the product that it is. So for me, like, it's really important for me to pitch games that I'm already proud of rather than like half-baked ideas that I think could turn into something.
Okay.
Only because like I want to value their time, and I also don't want to risk putting out something that I don't like.
Cool. So that kind of brings us up to Artsy. If we're going to do the tour of the J. Alex Kevern, library here, that brings us up to Artsy. So what were you trying to accomplish with this one? What problem were you trying to solve?
Yeah. So Artsy is combined a few different things I wanted to do. One is I really wanted to boil like an engine building game down to its essence. That's what I try to do in a lot of my designs, is like, how can we take mechanic and really like boil it down and sort of have as few rules as possible, but still have an interesting game. So Artsy really does that in that like each turn you're just adding a card to your gallery, and it's going to add certain paintings to your gallery and then score for certain paintings in the neighboring card rows. So literally every card you play is building this gallery engine that you can then score on future turns. So that was like one main thing I wanted to accomplish, is just like this simple bare bones engine building game, and then figure out how can we like build an interesting game around this. The other thing I was trying to accomplish is I wanted to make a game that would play 5 players, and any game that plays more than 4 for me has to have something that you're doing on other players' turns. So there needs to be that level of interaction where you're not just waiting for 4 other people to take your turn, and then I take my turn, and then I'm stuck waiting again. So it was important to me to have that mechanic where if somebody plays a yellow card, if I have any yellow cards showing, I get to add visitors to those cards. So literally, like every turn, somebody can be playing something that that's going to benefit me in some way and is going to give me a reason to pay attention and a reason to stay engaged during other players' turns. So that was the other thing I wanted to emphasize, is this really strong like player interaction, almost positive player interaction that didn't have any like attacking or any sort of negative player action component, but it was really like a positive way that all players can stay engaged. And the last thing was I hadn't really made a card.
Right? Like it's not just
exactly, yeah.
You're not just waiting to get hit or smacked. You're just I'm waiting to get stuff, which.
Exactly. And if I have 3 red cards face up and somebody's holding 2 red cards and a yellow card, I'm really hoping they don't play that yellow card. So it gives you a reason to sort of care what other players are doing on their turn rather than checking your phone or just zoning out when other players are playing.
Right.
Yeah. And then, the really the last thing I was trying to do, I really wanted to make a card game. I hadn't really made sort of a true card game before where you're holding cards in a hand. And I really wanted to like explore that mechanic of having cards in hand. So in Artsy, you can see the backs of players' cards, which are evidence of like what's on the front of that card. So like I said, I can see if somebody's holding 2 reds and a yellow card, and potentially like play some red cards out, because when they play a red card, I'll get a benefit from it. Right. So having that information of like the color of cards that players are holding in hand and seeing, not only can I create a card game, but can I create a card game that like explores that mechanic of players holding cards in hand a little bit more than had been done before, was also something I was trying to do with it.
Cool. So it's who's responsible for the pun? That's what I want to know.
Artsy? I should go back into the thread and figure that out. So we work with some great sort of art directors and things like that. I forget who exactly came up with the name. It may have been Anita, who's the art director over at Renegade. Right. But yeah, it was a lengthy brainstorm for titles. And I remember as soon as we came up with that one, we were like, yeah, that's the one. That's it. That's it. We like it. Yeah.
So that brings us to one of the darlings of the con for us, because, you know, this is normally it's release time. So we're getting it out there in the world. We have demos of it going on all day long. We have it available up on Tabletopia if you want to give it a shot and try it out. And that would be the aforementioned Succulent. So in this one, I think you kind of revisited that really just super pretty, like aesthetic game that I think you kind of got out of, you know, World's Fair in the past. Yeah. Succulent was a really fun one to work on. I really wanted to make like my best shot at making sort of an evergreen game. So no pun something that's intended. Right, exactly. Actually, it wasn't intended. That was good. But again, like accessible game, but wasn't too puzzly. So I think a lot of my other games, like particularly Sentient, which you mentioned before, they're sort of hard to play. It takes a lot of thinking to sort of play it well. And I wanted sort of a smoother experience that still had those strategic choices, but you could play casually if you wanted to. Okay.
So in Succulent, you're basically getting new garden plots to place, or you're placing a garden plot. Those are the only two things that you can do. And when you place a garden plot on the board, you'll get succulent cuttings based on the succulents that you cover up. So it's sort of a resource collection game where you're using those succulent cuttings to complete garden projects. And there's this interesting sort of board interaction where whenever I place a garden plot, I'll place one of my flower tokens on that plot. And anytime somebody or me places next to my flower, some water will splash over and I'll get a water droplet, which will help me grow more succulents in sort of my personal garden. So there's this interesting game that sort of like Artsy, a similar thing to that, where on other players' turns you can gain things. But it's really the smooth experience where you're collecting cuttings and you're completing projects, and it's this really satisfying sort of experience where you're trying to get the right cuttings at the right time. And a lot of those projects will score in different ways that'll make each game different. But yeah, that was a really fun one to work on and really flesh out this succulent theme, which I was really surprised hadn't really been done. And I think I was really just proud of how the cover came out and how all the components came out and how we really I think evoke that succulent theme really well, all the way down to the little pieces that look like little succulent cuttings.
No, I think it came out gorgeous. And it's one of those ones, yeah, it's fine to play online, but I think it's very also tactile, right? You need to move things around, and playing with those nice little chunky bits is just wonderful.
Yeah.
Even the water droplets and things.
Yeah, the water drops are really cool, and even the board. So you'll be placing these little garden plots on the board that really make it beautiful. It's sort of you're completing this garden out on the board, and then even the way your little flower pieces will drop into those die cuts, you end up with this almost 3D 3-layer visual. That is hard to get across on the Tabletopia version, but in the physical product is actually really cool to see. Right. Where the flower tokens will actually nest in to the garden plots. And actually looks really cool out on the board. And even the little player tokens, which is a little shovel or a little rake or a little spray bottle, those are really cute and fun. So just feeling those and having one of those to move around in person is cool too.
The kids call it Instagrammable, I think. Alex,
I hope so. I think that's yes. Please post all your pictures. We would love to see them. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's going to be one of those ones that just lends itself to. I really want to capture this because I made something kind of awesome, right? It's one of those kind of
and a little bit of behind the scenes on that. We wanted to. That was really something that we're shooting for, is to have the board, which starts off as just sort of a bare succulent garden. It's just rocks. And we wanted to make sure that what you ended up with at the end of the game was more beautiful and more Instagrammable, as you said, than what you started with. So that was really something we were explicitly shooting for, was how can we have players make this more beautiful as the game goes on. So we really tried hard to make those garden plot tiles, they're die cut around the edges. So they're sort of rough edges that follow a very organic line around the tile. And even those flower tiles that I mentioned that you pop in to those die cuts, making sure that those are beautiful and those colors look nice together on the board. That was something an active thing that we were focused on, is how can we make this a beautiful game and something that looks more beautiful at the end than it does at the start, rather than sort of busier and messier than some games fall into. Sure.
Absolutely. So what's kind of on the horizon? What are some themes, or what are some mechanics mechanisms, because mechanics work on cars, mechanisms that you want to explore in the future?
So it's there's a few different things that I'm working on more. I'm there's some mechanics in terms of like having several cards out at once and exploring sort of the temporal aspect of playing cards. So this idea of like cards I played before matter for the cards I played later. So that's a mechanic that I'm exploring now, sort of how like the past can affect the future type thing. Sure. I think there's a lot there in terms of like that simple decision of like, what order do I play things? That's like a very simple, I think a simple way to like create some interesting thoughts in players' heads, for lack of a better phrase. So I think if I have 3 cards and I know I'm going to be playing these 3, but my only choice is to figure out what order I should play them in, I think that's an interesting but very simple like thing to get across. And I think there's other games that do that well. So there was a game called Reef that came out a couple of years ago. It's a very simple game, but figuring out the order you want to do things to get things to score in the right way is something that happened a little bit in Artsy, that you might have 3 cards and you might want to play this card out first because it has a red painting on it that I want to score in my next turn. But I really want to explore that farther in terms of like, are there ways that, that mechanic can be explored in interesting new ways.
Interesting. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I mean, you're kind of on this trend to do 1 a year. So, hopefully. I
know. And I don't know if this, everything that's going on now, it was very sad to see Gen Con canceled. So I'll have to find ways to pitch virtually or see how that goes. So who knows? Maybe it'll be, Succulent will actually be my 10th game. So okay. I'm actually taking I want to take some time to think about like, what are some lessons learned from the first 10 games I've put out. I think I've been very fortunate, and a lot of them have done well, and I'm very proud of them. But I think there are like certain things I can learn to try to make the next 10 even better. So I think this is a good sort of, I guess, forced sabbatical in some ways, where it's a bit of a reset, and it happens to come sort of at the release of my 10th game, where I can really think about, how can I like make sure that the 11th and all the ones that come after that are as good as they can be.
Awesome. So I think it's a great thing to end on here, and that would be, there's a lot of people who have a lot of time on their hands, and they might feel that this is a great time to design a game. What is some advice you might want to pass down as somebody who has award won and has been successful in the space?
Yeah, I think it's really important to design the game you want to play. I think a lot of people who design games often play a lot of games, and I think it's important to think about what are the games you really like, and what is it really like at its essence that you like about those games. And then when you're designing your own game, like really focus on those things. So is it like this combo making that you really like, and you tend to like games where you can combo a lot of things together and put together these like complex interactions where like this whole engine pays off at the end? Or is it other things? Is it the tension between players? Is it the interaction where you want to make a highly interactive game? So really figure out like, what are those common denominators among the games that you like? Because those are going to be the games you're going to be good at designing, because you sort of understand what makes them tick. When you make it, you'll be able to like articulate whether it's fun or not, and whether it sort of stands up against the other games that you like that are similar to that. And then often, like, if you like a certain type of game, often you'll be left wanting when you like play a game that you think is going to be something, but isn't quite what you thought is going to be. And often, like, it's important to think about like, what are you left wanting for, and can I design a game that like fills that need or scratches that itch, or fills some sort of niche that doesn't exist currently. So those are a lot of the ways that I was able to get started, like trying to design something that I wanted to play ultimately, because you will be playing it a lot, and also like you're also like the best judge of that. Like I would never design like a role-playing game or really heavy like social type game, just because I'm not like a good judge of those games. Like I will play them, but it's not the types of games that like typically really click for me. And that I think I would be like the best person to design. I will leave that to those experts that are good in those areas.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to, sit down and talk with us and, get to know you and your design path a little bit better. Thanks so much.
Amazing. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you having me.
Awesome. So be sure to check out Succulent come on, it's gorgeous. You got to check it out. And, feel free to stop by, say hi, ask any questions. If you see us around the con, we'll be happy to answer them. So enjoy your evening and